What's good with it in the hood with it? Welcome back to the collective clips where you already know. We about to get it in. But before we get it in, let's hit that like and subscribe button. You know what? Let's just do it like this. Welcome back to the collective clips. We're about to get it in. But before we get it in, hit that like and subscribe button. Put your notification bell on all. Ding. So that way you're directed in the direction of the dope content that the gun is kicking. So next episode, another super gangs, right? One of the new super series that I developed and I got coming out is this one right here, man. We did Bakersfield already. We did Sanjo Norteños. I got a whole lot more on deck. But today I wanted to give some flowers to the white men, brother, right? And to one particular group of white men, the Nazi lowriders. I said that shit and people started ducking, right? The Nazi lowriders, there's a long history there. I've done several videos on the NLRs because I got a lot of respect for that group, even though I never really ran into too many. There's not too many people that can say that they ran into too many Nazi lowriders on the main line. There's a reason for that. We're going to get into it. The NLRs, they started in the Youth Authority. Several gangs have started in the Youth Authority. You know, one of the biggest organizations ever was developed in the Youth Authority and then really set their foundation and their mark in Tracy, DVI. But, you know, the Nazi lowriders were a group of white men. And in the beginning, it wasn't only white men. There were some Mexicans involved, some half-breeds is what they would call them. Brother, they were half Viking, half Aztec warrior. The best of both worlds. Throw in a little Genghis Khan and a little Shaka Zulu, and what do you get? Eminem and Dr. Dre, a new song. Anyways, look, trip out. The Nazi lowriders were a very respected group. And there was a time in the late 80s, 90s when they were terrorizing the California Department of Corrections. Okay, I never ran into an NLR in YA. It's crazy because a lot of these groups or gangs that started back in the 70s in the Youth Authority, they just disappeared. When I got to the Youth Authority, these were already prison groups, prison organizations, and gangs, and no one spoke on them. You know, in the Youth Authority, you didn't speak on a lot of what was going on in prison. You listened, you kept your ear to the fucking ground and heard the rumbles, heard the earthquakes, heard the shit shaking, but you never talked about it because we were laced a different way. Especially in the 90s, we were taught that these groups, these prison organizations were not to be spoken on whatsoever, and don't even look. The fuck you looking at, is he? Don't even look over there. But the Nazi lowrider group was white men that started their own thing for whatever reason. And the word lowrider, when you think lowriders, you automatically think Chicanos, Cholos, the California culture, okay, of Mexicans. And the Nazi lowriders adapted two different cultures into one. They took the Nazism, or what you would consider Nazis, and then there's a gang of different elements to Nazis. Not all of them are racial. Not all of them are bad, right? But we only hear about the bad, and it's kind of normalized now. But that's what we think. You heard the word Nazi, and it's like, oh, shit. Elon Musk, right? You think some crazy stuff, but it's not necessarily that. I'm not going to get into the history of Nazism and Nazis, but I will say that they took that, the Nazis, and the lowriders and developed a very vicious and treacherous organization and group within the California Department of Corrections system. Facts. Now, I will say this. The first title of that group was not the Nazi lowriders. It was actually the Southern Alliance. And that's kind of where the lowrider comes into play. The reason why they were called the Southern Alliance is they were white men that were in the Youth Authority that clicked up with Southsiders for protection or for aggression, or whatever you wanted to call it. Look, I did time in Southern California. Fred C. Nellis, it's no longer around. It's tore down, right? And there was a very, very limited white men there. But I will say this. I've said it before. I'll say it again over and over. The white men that were there, that were functioning, did function up under the Southsiders umbrella. And at the same time, they were with the business, man. I had to get into it with several of them several times just because, you know, the Southsiders would basically utilize them to handle business. Like, hey, if you want to prove that you can kick it with us and fly under our umbrella, motherfucker, you can feel the rain, right? And if it is in love, why does it feel this way? And so they would put them on frontline status. And of course, they'd be trying to get off the few of them that there were in the chow halls or in the school area, and they'd get boo-bopped. But anyways, that's just how it was. You win some, you lose some. It's part of the game, brother. Okay, so now I go to prison. And I hear about this group, the Nazi Lowriders, and, you know, I get ran down by an OG homie who tells me these guys were targets. At that time with the Norteños, if you identified anyone that was a Nazi lowrider, you know, because they had already been locking them up, placing them in the back. These guys were like, there was a few of them flying under the radar on the main lines, but you wouldn't know who they were. They were well protected and insulated from any enemies finding out, because these guys posed a threat. See, these guys were foot soldiers. They were actually soldados, and became kind of like the Northern structure for a limited time, a little bit too big for their britches, meaning that the big organization of white men recognized that these guys were, a lot of people were wanting to join the Nazi lowriders, right? A lot of people were wanting to be a part of that group just because of the nature of how they moved, how they carried themselves, and the respect that they were gaining on them yards. You know, they were vicious. You hear a lot of stories about Nazi lowriders, but you hear very few of them tell them. Okay, it's a group that for, I'd say, about a 5 to 6 year period was handling business in the CDC when it came to white men. They were the ones putting in all the work. They were the ones establishing. They were the ones gaining numbers, and that got shut down very quickly because a certain group within the Nazi lowrider organization chose to go against the grain, chose to start a new clique, basically, called FT, and we're not even going to go with the last letter, right, out of respect. But that didn't last too long, okay? And what the other organization was able to do was bring in some of the founding members of the Nazi lowriders, some of the hierarchy, and lay the law down and tell them you're either with us or you're against us, and you do not want to be against us because, brother, white men don't have coffee. They go crazy, right? And that was that. And so that noise got killed very quick. Now, what happened somewhere in the 80s, early 90s, when the Department of Corrections in California were slamming everybody. They were slamming any South Side affiliates of any organization, any Northerners, any Northern structure, anyone who would get validated, who they felt were somebody or something. They were getting slammed and placed in these shoes for indeterminate programs, meaning they were doing all day, every day in the shoe. And nobody wants to do time like that. You know, doing prison time is bad enough. You're away from your family, you're away from your loved ones, you're away from your friends, you're away from society as a whole. And that bears down on people different. People take it differently. Some people can adapt to the yard, just like myself, and understand, hey, this is what I've done. This is why I'm here. You know, I'm guilty. I'm not innocent. I got to do my time accordingly and function how I need to function within my gente. Other people will get in there and they just, all they want to do is get out. They just are trying to run away from the inevitable. But when you're on that yard, man, you're not going nowhere, Holmes, and you got to do your time. Now, the Nazi lowriders were a group that I used to hear about. And like I said, I was told, if you ever identify any of these guys, whether it be by tattoo or the nature that they carry themselves, because they did carry themselves from just different white men. Okay, they carried themselves with a whole lot of pride and a lot of arrogance. One thing, and I've met a couple of Nazi lowriders, I'm going to tell you the story. These guys were arrogant because they were about the business. Now, did I witness anything going on? I witnessed two incidents. One incident I heard about, and I witnessed another incident go down, right? And I could tell you right now, the nature and the characterization of the Nazi lowriders to me was exactly what people said it was. They were violent, okay? Now, when they started to get slammed back in the shoes, what happened was, you know, out of sight, out of mind. They started to lose traction and lose numbers. And because of the internal shit that was going on within the group that started the group within the Nazi lowriders and their bad blood with the biggest white prison organization, you know, a lot of people kind of strayed away from it. The Nazi lowriders stopped recruiting people. People were like, nah, no can do, homie. You guys are too lowriderish. I'm good, right? And you got to understand, when you think white groups in prison, you think Woods, brother, Pecker Woods and Skins. But they got a lot of groups within those two groups, okay? I ran into, you know, the American Skins, the Wolf Pack, the what are they? The Fresno fucking Maniacs or whatever they are. I think they're the Fres White Boys, whatever they are, right? The Fresnecs, okay? I ran into the Fresnecs. I ran into the Sacramaniacs. I ran into the Oildale Skinhead Peckerwood brothers, right? And several skins from Southern California, Orange County, that area, Long Beach. There was a lot of them. And so they had their own little cliques within the big group. But one thing about the white men in prison, especially groups like Nazi lowriders, push comes to shove, white men stick together. If it ain't white, it ain't right. That's the first rule you got to learn, right, brother? I'm going to be the good veterano and tell you, you got a shot of coffee first? Okay, now I can be the good veterano. If you ain't got a shot of coffee or a shot of meth, then guess what, brother? Get the fuck out myself or I strangle you. That's how the white men talk, right? They're gangsters. But the Nazi lowriders that I ran into one. I was doing time out of state, and I remember when he hit the yard. Now in this state, it wasn't like everyone was divided by yards. Yes, they kept north and south separate in some prisons, but for the most part, the woods and the skins, they were cool. Like I used to chop it up with some. I was real good friends with a few of them. And they did the black and white thing. Of course, they didn't eat after each other or fuck with each other, but there was guys that talked. It was a different element of being locked up. It was like old school. Everybody just treated each other with respect until you didn't. And this guy gets there and he's bald and he has an NLR right here. And I flashed back to my old times, like, hey, we're not supposed to be around these guys. But I understood it was a different state, different program, different function, right? And so I remember seeing him on the yard, and we kind of gravitated towards each other, the California lifestyle that we live, where the bitches is crooked and just don't give, right? And so I remember hitting him up one day, hey, who are you, bro? I said, are you from NLR? And he was like, yeah, I'm a Nazi lowrider. He was pretty cool, right? And I could see a lot of the woods that were there, they were jocking him. Just his dick was stretched all the way across the yard. His shit was over there with the blacks at the basketball courts. That's how far they stretched his shit. That fool, they were swinging, right? There was dudes that they were just all captivated because you hear stories about the Nazi lowriders. They're a very well-known group that no one really knows nothing about. And so, having the knowledge that I do, the knowledge you couldn't get in college, I started chopping him. This guy, that guy had heard names around the way. He's like, yeah, that's my brother. And whatever, he was a cool dude. Well, what happened was he ended up being the man on the yard. And just like anyone else, man, when you're getting all the respect and all the shine, what happens? You start to become arrogant, an asshole. And so his assholeization was going, and I kind of kept my distance. He was a cool dude with me, never no problems, but I could see the shit brewing. And what happened was maybe, I say it was about a few months prior to his incident, there was a solid wood on that yard, right? And he was in the dope game doing his thing or whatever he was doing. And there was a brother, man, that he got into it with for whatever reason. And that brother was like, man, get away from me, you punk ass white guy, right? And then you can't do that in prison. You can't disrespect someone like that. And them type of shenanigans were starting to happen. So that dude got off on him in the yard viciously, got off on the black, and the tower ended up shooting the black dude. And that was that, right? And so the Nazi lowrider dude, not being one, he can't have someone one up him, especially someone of his own race. He had to show that was his yard and he was running that shit. He got into it with the brother too, man, over a debt. And he went out into the yard and he bit the brother's nose off. True story, right? Imagine biting off Crip Mac's nose. He'd be, oh, five me, cuz, right? Mama bear, everything doesn't seem all right, right? He's gonna be all fucked up. Imagine biting off Brick Baby's nose. On the dead homies, I can't. The dead homies, I can't breathe. Sounds like you can't breathe anyways. Imagine biting off, what's that other black dude? The blood? The big old fucker. What's his name? Man, the one he fought Nina Boy. You know who I'm talking about. Imagine biting his shit off. That's a 2-biter. You have to bite that shit twice. Anyways, he did that, right? And I remember like, wow, this motherfucker's crazy Nazi lowrider. Well, years later, I ended up coming back to the California system and going to prison. And I've told the story. I ran into a couple of Nazi lowriders. They were in the shoe. They brought them for court purposes to the prison I was at, man. And they rushed some non-actives, right? They were able to get off and handle their motherfucking business. So that was my interaction with Nazi lowriders. Now, I've heard a lot of stories. One thing I can tell you guys is the truth is this, they're not around like they used to be. There's still some. They're still well revered, well respected, but you're not going to see them like you used to. Now, with all this end of hostilities and people being placed back on the main lines, you think you would see more Nazi lowriders, but you got to understand they stopped recruiting. They actually stopped bringing guys into that group because they got dangerous when they got thick, meaning when they started gaining numbers, they posed a threat. Now, the same thing happened with the Norteños. I come from the era when a northerner, there was no northerners. You were just Norteños. Whether you were really into the gang politics or you were just on the streets, a homie from Avada, you were a Norteño, right? You wore that shit on your sleeve proud. Like, we were always proud of where we came from and what we were into. It didn't matter about the numbers, didn't matter about any of that. We had strict rules, man. We were going to strive for our cause, strive with each other. And as long as you didn't shed any of our blood, then you were good. You were worthy of the cause. Anyone else, man, can get it. That's how we felt. This was just the propaganda that was pushed to us, educated to us, instilled and indoctrinated into us, and this is how we moved. Okay, so I had no issues with anyone unless I knew they were an enemy and they spilled Northern blood. Now, Nazi lowriders had done that. For whatever reason, the Wood affiliation or the white affiliation with the Southsiders has always been true. It's not like they're the best of friends. I've seen Southside, I've probably seen Southsiders and Woods get off more with each other than any other groups. But there were certain situations where, hey, an enemy of my enemy is my friend, right? And so they would click up for certain situations. They functioned behind the walls in the oil and shit together, worked out together, just things like that. And that was old school relationships from the past, and they just continued that legacy on. Now, just like with the Norteños, once the structure started to get deeper, once that group was implemented, they started to gain a lot of numbers, and they were the eyes, the ears, the arms, the everything on them yards for the organization, and they were doing whatever they were doing. Once their numbers started to get crazy and a few wanted to just do their own thing, that got killed quick. Okay, that motion got stopped immediately. Well, same thing happened with the Nazi lowriders. There was a few of them that felt that, hey, we don't need to function within this organization. We don't need to pay respects or give action to our forefathers anymore. We're deep enough to be our own thing. Well, that didn't work out. There's only been two groups in the history in California of doing some gangster shit that have ever. I know of three groups. One other group that for a minute there, when I was in the youth authority, they were doing it. I don't know how they were doing it in prison. But one of the groups that I seen that was able to get away from their organization or not function within that organization was the Maravillas, right? They were big enough to do what they did. Now, there was a light put on them back in the days. Eventually, they were able to get away from that and do what they do now. There's still some of them that don't function under the 13. They don't function like that with Southerners. They don't consider themselves Southsiders. And there are those that do. I've been with both locked up. Then there were the Bulldogs who were able to actually pull away from a prison organization in a group and become their own thing. They're one of the only gangs to have done it, do it, and still continue to do it. And it's been a struggle, I'm sure, for them, right? And then the other group at one point in time, and I've told the story, was 18th Street. They were, when I was locked up at YA, I remember they were like, we're going to just do our own thing. And it didn't last very long, a couple months, I remember, and they were back getting off on the Northerners again. So that was that, right? But the Nazi lowriders were a group that was basically trying to do their own thing too for a minute, and that noise got killed. And that's why, when we do these videos or these lives and people ask me all the time, hey, could a group like the GDs or the Latin Kings or any of these Puerto Rican groups or Colombians or Venezuelans, could they function in the California system and start their own thing? The answer is no. And the reason the answer is no is there's no more real estate left. There's no more territory left. Whatever is here and it's established, and nothing's going to change that. Maybe somewhere in the future, the Edgars could click up together when they can get their fingers out of their assholes, smell it, and get to pushing. I don't know what the future holds, but I know as of now, I don't think so. That's just my honest opinion. Having been locked up around groups, I can tell you there's no real estate left. That's just like a Norteño trying to go start a gang in LA. Where at, bro? Every fucking corner is a barrio or a neighborhood. There's no more real estate left, right? And not only that, Southsiders ain't gonna let that happen. That's a fact, right? So anyways, the sheer number you just wouldn't be able to overcome that. When it comes to the Nazi lowriders, man, they're a group that's not talked about a lot, very clandestine, and one of the groups of the past. I don't see them ever getting a foothold moving forward like they used to, but they're still well respected. The legend and the legacy of the Nazi lowriders is forever going to be respected because, during the 90s, when there was some real gangster shit going on, when there was a lot of guerra and war in the California prison system and on the streets, these guys were making noise. Like I said, these guys were the ones that obviously they raised eyebrows because the CDC doesn't just designate certain groups, security threat groups or shit like that. They don't just do that for anyone. Okay, they've heard everything, they've seen everything. So if they really take a look at your group and you're really doing it like that, and you get that tag, you earned that. I remember, even within the northern cause, man, we would talk more about getting off on the Nazi lowriders if we see them than anyone else. And that's because the viciousness in the pegadas and the removals and the things that they did left a bad taste in people's mouths. They were definitely with the program and the business. People ask me about Nazi lowriders all the time. They're like, hey, Gun, did you do time with them? A few. Did they have respect like that? They did. What happened? What happens with every other thing, man? Time moves fast. It moves slow and fast all at the same time. It's like a chocolate fucking vanilla swirl, right? It moves and things change. People change. Time changes. You know, one thing that will never change, though, within the California Department of Corrections is what's already cemented in stone. Everything else around it changes and people adapt. But there are certain things that won't change. And you know, if you know, and if you don't, I'm not the one that's going to tell you. Go to Renegade Media. He'll tell you whatever you want to hear. Facts, right? Not here. Anyways, and that's not a shot at him. That's just the truth. Look it. See, I'm being nice. Go over there, support it. You know what I mean? You might even find out about something about yourself. He knows more about you than you know about you. You know what I mean? Someone told him. Anyways, with that being said, that's my little spiel. Super gangs, Nazi lowriders. You know what it is, man. Thumbs up or thumbs down. Heavy's going to be the head that wears the crown. I'm going to continue to strive, struggle, and strive for what I truly believe in. And that's the betterment of all people. Now, I have other videos about Nazi lowriders that get more extensive into the foundation, who they really were. Make sure you guys find them on my list. Tap in, turn up. You already know what it is, man. I'm looking over here because I got to look over here to end this. And that's just real. It's not that I'm not looking at you. It's just that I'm looking.